Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. With me today is Dan Maslin. Dan is the head of cybersecurity for RACV, a key strategic role with accountability across several functions including strategy, architecture, operations, audit, compliance, risk, advisory and awareness and outreach in a diverse and rapidly changing business. Dan has 2 decades of enterprise IT experience across various roles and industries in Australia and the UK and holds the Certified Information Systems Security Professional, Certified in Risk and Information Systems Control, and Certified Information Security Manager certifications. Dan is committed to playing an active role in the cybersecurity community, participating as a volunteer Executive Advisory Board member with ASA, Executive Advisory Board member for Cyber with Deakin, and various other volunteer initiatives. Dan, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Hi Claire, thanks for having me. I've been enjoying the podcast episodes, so it's good to be part of it. Thanks for the invite.
No worries. So we've heard a little bit about you in your bio. How did you get to this point in your career as a leader, and how did you go from infrastructure architecture to a head of cyber?
Yeah, so for the last 15 years or so, I've been in the strategy and architecture space, so everything from short-term contracting roles through to some longer-term team leadership type roles. For me, I spent a lot of that time in the network and infrastructure architecture space, so security solutions related to networks and infrastructure. As part of those roles, we had responsibility for strategy and roadmaps, which often included the information security domain. During execution of one of those strategies, it included the establishment of an internal security function. And at that point, I decided to make the move into a security leadership role. So it was opportunistic. I did have a background across security architecture, and it was just the right time and the right place.
I've heard a lot, or many people have had that transition from architecture to security leader. It's not unheard of. And in fact, it regularly comes up as something in the CVs of CISOs and security leaders. Was it something you'd always aspired to do? Or, I mean, you've just talked about the fact that you came across it in a project and you made the move across. But would you recommend architecture as a good base skill towards security leadership?
Yeah, I would. And I agree. I've seen that transition a few times with other people as well. I think that, there's similar skill sets there. And ones that I leveraged quite heavily was that broad understanding of technology, so that exists in both of those roles, but also the relationships that you form within the business, and you get in the architecture space, you get a good view of how a business operates, quite a broad view, and both of those areas transition nicely into a security leadership role. For me, so back to the first part of the question, I had done some team leadership roles in the strategy and architecture space. I enjoyed the people leader side of it, so it was something that I did want to return to at some point in the future.
Interestingly enough, in some of our other podcast episodes, the leaders I've spoken to spoke about an architect being the first person that they would hire when they first arrived in a role. In terms of your priorities, if you were the first to arrive as the leader of a security team, who would you hire given your background? Are you in agreement with that an architect's the first right hire, or who would you hire first?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. There's probably some conditions around that statement, but I think depending on the organisation, their operating model, their risk appetite, those sorts of things. But if there is some level of security operations or incident response, I would definitely be looking at someone that can provide either security architecture or provide the advisory and risk function to the business. So starting to build that relationship into the business to start talking about information and cyber risk. I think that's an excellent place to start, and that would be one of my first hires on the proviso that there is a level of incident response capability within the organisation.
So what's your current team like? What is the size like and the roles that you've got? And did you have any principles that you followed to bring that together, or was the team already there when you arrived?
So in my current role, part of my role was to establish that permanent team, so they weren't there. Current roles, nine reports into me, and that's split across security operations, architecture, and advisory. So they function as essentially our business partners. So they'll work on projects, business projects, technology projects, and provide some advisory around the cyber and information security risks. There's audit and compliance, which is fairly self-explanatory, and then there's a team for awareness and adoption. So they run everything from phishing campaigns, targeted training, through to so we specifically call it adoption because we see that a lot of security projects and technology projects aren't well adopted by staff. So we've got an adoption piece there, which makes sure there's some organisational change management and communications around the security projects. And it is a real mix of people, actually. They've got real varying backgrounds and real varying levels of experience. So we've got everything from student placements through to those that have 20 years experience across 10 or so organisations. They all have one thing in common, though. They all want to be there. They all want to be doing the roles, and they're quite passionate and curious people. So it's something that I look for. In terms of bringing them together, look, there's probably a few things, and this wouldn't be unusual in modern security teams. We don't want any of the I think the term that's being used these days is brilliant jerks. We don't want any of those people. We don't need talented people that are going to come at a high cost to the team and the organisation. So, I can really put that down to the attitude of people. And we don't want someone that wants to be part of a no team. We're not looking for a mall cop. We're looking for someone that's going to help the business understand the risks in the activities that they're undertaking. So, I think gone are the days of the security team saying no. It's about partnering with the business and helping them to understand the risks. Another thing that we look for, and as part of any of the interviews I do for the roles in my team, this is always part of the final interview, is presenting a case study back to a mock executive audience. And what we're trying to do there is understand the ability to articulate a technical point or a technical discussion back to a non-technical audience. So I'm always looking for the ability to explain these technical concepts to someone that doesn't work in the space every day. And then something that applies to all of those varying levels of backgrounds and roles is something that I call being able to stretch. So I find that we've had success in working with people that want an opportunity to step up or prove themselves. So someone that's sort of on the edge of making a step into a next role, and we'll set a number of stretch goals for them. And I find that really, really drives people. You find they're really passionate, really, really curious when they're challenged to stretch. So they're probably the handful of principles that look for across all of those roles.
Do you feel like you've set those principles based on what you feel you need in your team and also as a reflection of what's available in the market? Because some organisations have had to change their hiring practices or principles because they're not able to source the people they want. And, whether it's a skills crisis or not, do you feel like you've had to set yourself up for success in a way with your principles because of how the market is?
No, I think probably the background over the last 10 years or so. So working outside of a security team, working in that architecture and strategy space, I've seen how security teams can operate in quite a negative way. And I didn't want our team to be one of those teams. And I often call it the next generation of security professionals. And I think this team's been established just at the right time. We don't have any legacy things that are holding us back. We were able to create a modern day team. So I think, it reflects what organisations need and want these days, and that's what's driven us to use those rough principles.
Have you got an opinion on what is valuable to insource and what's valuable to outsource within your team? Mm-hmm. And I guess what experience have you had in successes around that side of things as well?
I think this applies across IT, not just cyber, but you always want to have in-house certain things that are related to strategy. So, setting your North Star, that definitely needs to stay in-house. And risk management, anything related to risk, you really want to have in-house as well. So you've got a good grip on that. In terms of what can be outsourced, and what I've seen outsourced successfully, where you need really, really deep technical skills that you may not touch on every day. So you may only utilize these types of things, once a month or once every 6 months. So things like unusual types of penetration testing, reverse engineering of malware, those sorts of things. Typically, in most organizations, you're not going to need those skills every single day. It makes sense to outsource those. And where there's repeatable processes, so you might have a managed service to look out after your SIEM platform, for example, to keep that up and running. They do the patching, they keep the lights on, they do the hardware replacement. So where there's that repeatable stuff, we can free up our valuable internal resources to do some things that are a bit more valuable to the organisation.
You mentioned before that many of the staff in your team come from quite different backgrounds, and I guess that's one way you can look at ensuring some diversity of thought in your team. Mm-hmm. But does diversity itself play a role in your bringing together of the group?
Yeah.
Or do you just sort of look at staff on their merits and on their background and bring them in based on the skills that you need? How do you put a diversity overlay on your team when you're hiring?
Yeah, so look, it boils down to me that, I don't want 10 people in the team that are all thinking the same thing. I think it's quite unhealthy if you're not respectfully challenging each other. And so in my team, I specifically look for people that are different to me and that are different to other people within the team. So, that may mean a different category of experience. So they might have different educational experience, different business experience, different industry experience, demographics, so male, female, ethnicity, where they've come from, geography-wise, what generation they are, all those sorts of things. We look for a broad spectrum there. And, there's a personal perspective as well. So the different values, different interests outside of work, different personalities, different family situations. So I think, once you look at all those different, I call them ingredients, everybody comes together with their unique recipe. And, we don't want 10 cakes sitting at the table, 10 same cakes. I want, 10 different cakes with 10 different unique recipes. Within my team, we've got all sorts of different backgrounds. I've got quite unusual. I've got someone that was a maths teacher at one point. Might sound unusual, but when you look at it from a security leadership perspective, he's fantastic. He's a fantastic presenter, and he's actually a natural coach for many junior members of the team. I've got someone else who their background is a journalist, which may sound unusual again, but when you look at the transferable skills, she makes a really, really good storyteller. So, it's great to watch her work with and gather some of that really detailed information and craft it into a story for non-technical audiences. So, look, I think different skill sets, different backgrounds, they all come together and play a part. So, I think it's really important to have a big mix.
So, throughout your career, both here and in Australia, have you found any challenges or hurdles in sourcing people for your teams, and not necessarily just in security, but across the different domains that you've worked in? What sort of challenges have you come up against? And have you found that different organisations have actually presented different challenges because of the vertical they're in or the style of business they do?
Like, we've been very fortunate. We haven't had too much trouble in sourcing for the current team, and we haven't faced some of those big hurdles that other organisations have. For me, I can put that down to having a fairly modern workplace. So, the ways that we work, the technologies and tools that we work, competitive remuneration, clearly defined purpose for the organisation, the team, the roles. So, I think that's really helped us in being able to identify and retain talent. In terms of other organisations that I've seen in the past, I think that they're essentially not been modern workplaces, and it can be very, very rigid ways of working. So almost a 9 to 5 clock in, clock out mentality. I think that drives people away. It's often no clear direction for the role or the team. So it's it's very hard to attract people and get them excited about the role or the team. Poor people leadership can lead to poor retention, and then again, poor reputation in the industry as well. So, it is a small world, particularly security in Melbourne. IT in Melbourne and Sydney is fairly small as well. And I think reputations about organisations, teams, roles, those sorts of things do get around, and it can make it harder to source for your teams. For us as well, we've opened up opportunities internally. So, we've had some secondments which have turned into permanent roles. So for us, we've looked outside of the box that you traditionally look for. We don't always recruit from external. So I think that's helped us as well to get some really good people into the team. Also, with other organisations, I've seen particularly around position descriptions, they're almost like a wish list as well. I saw one, I think it was in the last couple of weeks, looking for a graduate in cybersecurity, and the wish list was huge. And one of the things they wanted was a security certification, the CISSP, which actually requires 5 years of work experience to have that certification. And this was a graduate role they were looking for. So it's just a good example of where I think organisations are sometimes looking for people that are never going to exist, and if they're being unrealistic, they're never going to be able to fill those roles.
Yeah, I think a lot of organisations find that a challenge in terms of creating a really solid shortlist. Is what they're putting out into the market is not allowing the appropriately skilled candidates to come forward, because they read the laundry list in the job ad and think, well, I can only do half of those, or I don't have a CISSP, or whatever the case is. So it's definitely a challenge on both sides, I think, for candidates looking for the right job and for organisations putting out there a job description that is ultimately impossible to fill.
Yep, absolutely.
So what do you wish you'd known, Dan, way back when you were, say, 20? I ask all my podcast guests this question. Is there something you wish you could have told your younger self about building teams that you know now that would have helped to make things better or change things or allow you to have built teams maybe earlier in your career? What would be one thing that you would go back and say?
Yeah, so if I was to go back in time and give myself some advice around leadership 15 years ago, it would probably be that sometimes, the organisation is not the right fit, or it's not the right time for certain people within that organisation. And I'd say to myself that is okay, and that does happen. And you need to have that conversation pretty quickly. You need to nip that in the bud early on, particularly if expectations aren't being met. So, it may be the right organisation but the wrong time, or vice versa. But don't delay those difficult conversations. Rip off the Band-Aid and have those honest discussions sooner rather than later. I think it's better for everyone involved, the team member, the manager, and team morale. These things are noticed by the team when there isn't a good mix, and the advice would be it is okay for it not to be the right time or the right organisation for people, and have those difficult conversations sooner rather than later.
I think that's such good advice, because those conversations actually make you a better leader and make you a better manager. And 9 times out of 10, the person sitting on the other side of the table is really grateful that you've raised it, because maybe they've been looking for a way to raise it themselves.
Yeah, I feel that as well. It's I've had a number of these difficult conversations over the years, and you're right, 9 times out of 10, they're well aware of the situation. It's no surprise, and they're happy to have the discussion, an open discussion. Yeah. Thanks
so much, Dan. And how can people find you or find out more about you or connect with you? Where do you hang out online?
Yeah, so mostly on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there. I think I'm the only Dan Maslin in Australia, so look me up on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. Always love to chat with you, and I'll pop your details for LinkedIn in the show notes.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Claire.
Cheers.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO framework and sign up for my newsletter. If you loved the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.